Welcome to the Illumination Summit. Good morning in the Americas, good afternoon in Europe. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Before we start, just a quick announcement. As you can see, Monica Puy couldn't make it today. She had a personal issue that prevented her to join us today. However, it's my pleasure to let you know that Victoria Azarenka, 2 times Australian Open winner and former #1 of the world in tennis, will join us later today. Now, let me get you through the agenda that we're going to cover in the next hour and a half or so. I'm going to start sharing with you the need for a breakthrough in cybersecurity. And I have invited a personal friend, Bess, who will later join me to cover that session. Right after that, we will go to build the analogy between tennis and cybersecurity and how a precise response made a difference in the both fields. After that, cybersecurity expert Bruce Schneier is going to join us to share his view about the false sense of security and how detection or response can be an element to fight back that. After that, Shaffer, CIO from Greenhill Investment Bank, is going to join us to share with us how he has been responding to cyber threats during the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, Crystal Day Villanueva, one of our customer engagement specialists, is going to join us to share with us a demo about how we can defend with precision in cybersecurity. I urge you to stay until the end of the event, as we're going to have 2 awards that we're going to raffle live during the session that will help you make the difference in your community. You can use these awards to support local businesses or to donate them to a charity of your choice. Without further ado, let's start. So the breakthrough in cybersecurity. In order to start to talk about that, I think we first need to assess if we do even have a problem. What's the problem that we need to solve? And a quick search in Google will help us understand that, if any, the problem have gotten worse. Look at the evolution of the attacks. The iconic brands that have been affected by cyber criminals stealing some of their data. In 2017, Equifax. Look at 2019, the 6 months that we have in 2019. Just yesterday, Twitter announced another breach that affected some of the most influential people in the US, including President Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Elon Musk, among others. The speed of the breaches and the criticality of the data being stolen is evidence that the problem is getting worse. Now, let's not get confused about the previous slide, which is only showing the iconic brands that have been breached. But in 2014, there were more than 700 breaches alone, and that number is only trending up. The number of breaches and the amount of data that's being stolen is a all record high. In order to discuss more about this problem, I have invited a personal friend of me, Bess. Lane is a proven cybersecurity operator. He has been helping to build some of the most transformative cybersecurity companies in our industry, including Palo Alto Networks and Zscaler. He's now a cybersecurity investor, and we're thrilled to have you joining the Illumination Summit. Lane, welcome to the summit.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. On the heels of yet another hack attack against Twitter, so it continues.
Outstanding. Lane, let's get straight to the point. How did we get here? You've been building cybersecurity. You have been practicing cybersecurity for the last 25 years or so. How did we get here?
Well, I'm going to abbreviate a 25 to 30 year story in a short amount of time here today. But let's face it, when security was first an issue, we could look back to 1993 when Checkpoint began with firewalls. Everybody thought as long as we can protect the network. And at that time, threats and hackers really weren't existing in the true sense of internet cyber attacks. So blocking ports on a network seemed to get the job done. Quickly after that, with so many endpoints being out there, companies like Symantec, McAfee, Trend Micro made their way. But the reality was that the attacks became more sophisticated than the technologies being introduced. And over time, these technologies essentially weren't keeping up with the sophistication and creativity of the hackers, particularly as monetary motivation kicked into play. So essentially, we got to a point where even though there are many, many security technology companies, and I'm proud to say I've been a part of that process, but there are air gaps, and that's the key point here, the air gaps that exist, and those are the areas which get exploited. So that's the simple, short history that takes us to where we are.
All right, thank you for that. And now, where do you see the problem? Clearly, after 25 years of industry evolution, we continue to see breaches, right? Where, in your view, is the problem?
Yeah, let's begin with that word air gap. We've got many technologies deployed within enterprises, and I'm speaking primarily on the enterprise end of things because that's where most of the risk and the financial pain has been felt. With so many technologies and every company having a different infrastructure, your infrastructure is very different, and the technologies, in many cases, tens and tens of technologies, whether it's application protection, whether it's firewalls, whether it's social media protection, proxy capability, secure sign-on, all of these technologies create a very complex environment for even the CIOs and CISOs to manage. And in this complexity become those gaps. And in those gaps become the opportunities to exploit. So the problem exists in and I've used this term through my last two companies, the sprawl of technology that exists, and in particular, the gaps. Some companies have tried to develop platforms. You could look at one of my companies, Palo Alto Networks, develop a platform, but these platforms, for the most part, are many different technologies brought together, and all of a sudden, they don't cover all of the gaps. So the problem is over time, the complexity and the air gaps not being filled, even though great technology has been introduced along the way.
Very interesting. Thank you for that insight, Len. Now, I think we have learned from history in the physical world that it's hard to keep the adversary out, right? The Chinese attempt to do that with the big wall. France built the Maginot Line to try to keep the Germans out during World War II. And there are other many examples. Do you think that in the cyber war, we keep the adversary out? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, the answer is no. Now, as a technologist and somebody who likes to invent technology for cyber and invest in companies for technology, there's a wonderful outcome in terms of the potential for companies and building companies. But at the core, it's very bothersome that, quite frankly, the sophistication and intelligence of the hackers is equal, and in some cases even superior, to the technology that's being developed. So the answer is, until we come up, and we'll talk about this maybe in your next question, until we come up with ways to better prevent, we're going to have to deal with the fact that we're not going to be able to keep these adversaries out. It would be ludicrous to believe that we could do it.
So it's delusional to think that we can keep the adversary out. Is a different way to put it, right?
Yes.
Now let's go to the next question.
Yeah.
Where do you think we should go from here, right? What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, and you know, a lot of people have asked me, particularly since some of my last two companies have been great public successes, and we see even newer companies having great success in the commercial markets, CrowdStrike, Okta, et cetera. But the answer isn't creating new companies and new technologies. There's two key things that I think we need to see happen here. One of them is a fundamental level of intelligence to be able to predict and create an eventual, if you want to call it vaccination, a predictive, preventative capability far better than what we have today. That's going to require more sophistication in AI modeling, machine learning, and something I'm keenly interested in, deep learning, for being able to get us to a point of prediction and prevention. On the other piece of it, which is why I have interest in my relationship and friendships with you, Lou, at Lumu, is this ability to really get to the point of analyzing almost in an autonomous way, testing constantly. And this level of testing, if we can bring it to a point where we continue to monitor these air gaps, whether it's east-west, north-south traffic, whether it's application, whether it's traffic to the cloud or on and off network, remote workers at home, this is where we need to go. And I think it's one of the core beliefs you and the team at Lumu have, which interests me because autonomous, constant testing, analysis, monitoring is going to have to become a standard requirement across all
right. Thank you very much, Lane, for joining us today. Please stay around because I'm sure the audience is going to have questions to you, and we're going to cover that at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, guys, let me tell you what the bad guys have keep doing all along. You know, they keep completing this cycle. You know, this is something that the industry has named the cyber kill chain. They continue to do so. They go from planning to exfiltration, or from planning to encryption in the cases of ransomware attacks. And the common denominator along this process is that the bad guys have to get access to the network. They have to utilize the network. That's the only way that they can systematically gain success. And that's probably the reason why the past 25 years of cybersecurity industry evolution have been focused in keeping the adversary out. Well, as we just heard, it's delusional to think that way. Because in a world where attacks can evolve infinitely, at some point, the bad guys will get access to the network. And when that happens, the last resort that we have, the only option that we have, is to identify it with speed and contain the adversary with precision. And that's exactly how Lumu emerges. Lumu emerges as a technology that's simple to implement, where enterprises can, number one, intentionally look for compromises. Just like we intentionally look for vulnerabilities and we find them and patch them, or we intentionally look for problems in defense and we find them and we address them, Lumu encourages enterprises to intentionally look for the adversary within the network. And better yet, doing that in a continuous manner, hence continuous compromise assessment. And the added value that enterprises have for embracing this concept is that now they have the ability to measure the effectiveness of their cybersecurity infrastructure. Clearly, if there is a compromise, that compromise went through the cybersecurity architecture. But now we have the information to feedback that into the cybersecurity architecture to contain the problem, to mitigate the issue. I'm going to talk more about feedback at the end of my session. Now, how we do that? At Lumu, we have built a platform that we call the Illumination process. It's a patent-pending technology that starts with these 5 elements of network metadata. 5 elements that help us to assess compromise with speed and precision. I'm going to explain each one of these elements and the value behind it. Initially, the DNS queries. Why? Because when a device is compromised, the first thing that device does is to attempt to resolve a domain that belongs to adversarial infrastructure. If that's the case, if you have any of your devices within your network that's attempting to do so, the conclusion is evident. That device has been compromised. It shouldn't behave that way. The next question that you want to answer is what that compromised device is attempting to do in my network. And in order to do so, Lumu ingests net flows. Net flows give us the insights about how a compromised device is attempting to move within the network, what other assets it is trying to reach. If an attack is instrumenting domain resolution, then the only possible way, there's no other, for that attack to contact the external world is if it connects directly with an IP address. If that's the case, then the traces of adversarial contact are going to reside on the access logs of firewall and or proxies. And lastly, the spam box. In a world where 95% of the attacks start with an email, stopping by email is good, but analyzing it is better. Why? Because when you analyze spam bots, you can get to know who and how is trying to attack your organization. And when you correlate that information with these 4 elements of network metadata, you get to know if the bad guys are being successful in its crusade to compromise your organization. Lumu ingests these 5 elements of network metadata from the multiple IT environments that enterprises have today into our cloud where the Illumination process is running, and customers access their unique level of compromise using a customer portal that we're going to demo later in this session. Now, at this point, I think we have settled that continuous compromise assessment is your strategy. It's how you plan for the long run to continuously win the battle against the adversary. But like in a tennis match, we need to win every point. And in order to make every point to count in our favor, we need to respond with precision. Victoria Azarenka is going to join us later to build that analogy. But before we do that, let me share with you how Lumu helps cybersecurity teams to respond with precision. If you ask any cybersecurity analyst what information I need to defend my organization, to respond with precision to every one of the attacks that we have, the answer will fall amongst these bullets. They need the way the attack is spreading among the network. They want to know how many assets or endpoints have been compromised and exactly where they are. They like to understand how long that attack is going on. What's the adversary objective? Have we seen that attack before and under what circumstances? We call this rich, actionable compromise contest. And we're going to see this in action in the last session of today's summit when Crystal de Villanueva demoed to us how to defend with precision. Let's recap a little bit here. The power of continuous compromise assessment and the value that it adds for enterprises that embrace this concept is number 1, to intentionally and continuously look for compromises. Number 2, to operationalize indicator of compromises. Finding threat intelligence nowadays is not a problem. There are a ton of threat intelligence out there. The hard part is to operationalize that threat intelligence in your organization. And in order to do so, you need to combine that threat intelligence with the network metadata that your organization is producing. Lumu simplifies that for you. Third, expand your cybersecurity practices. The one thing that enterprises that have been breached continues to do are vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. In fact, they continue to do so in average between 6 to 18 months until they realize that they have been compromised. What's the one thing they didn't? They didn't look for the adversary within the network. That's the missing link in the cybersecurity framework. Organizations have to continuously look for the adversary within the network. And when they identify that, they can stop that attack, they can contain the damage. And lastly, you can test the cyber defense strategy that you have. But you can test it with factual data about the attacks, that are affecting your organization, as opposed to the noise of the industry, that help you to build the strategy that your organizations need. How adversaries are attacking specifically your organization. Where are those air gaps that Lane was talking about? We call it blind spots. Where are the attacks and where are the blind spots where your infrastructure is not covering? And that way you can cover those gaps. My last slide before we go into something more fun, the breakthrough in cybersecurity. I am an electrical engineer by background, and I always have been passionate about how complex system works. And that curiosity take me to dig deeper into control theory. Some of the most complex systems in the world use control theory to execute their job and to execute it well. Now, isn't it funny that in cybersecurity, as complex as it is, it behaves as an open system. We continue to deploy layers of security into our organization, yet we're not measuring the end result. The only reason why we invest in cybersecurity is to avoid being compromised. And that's exactly the one thing that we're not measuring directly. If we somehow can extract all your cybersecurity defenses, all your firewalls, or your IDS, or your IPS, EDRs, and so on and so forth, as a function of cybersecurity, what comes into that function are the attacks. What comes out is the residual compromise level of your organization, where your cybersecurity architecture wasn't able to stop. Lumu is this gauge that is measuring in real time that residual compromise. But the beauty of having that information is that now I can feedback that into the cybersecurity organization, into the cybersecurity architecture. And the value of doing that is that the whole system now can autonomously find or pursue the ideal state in cybersecurity, which is the state of zero compromise. Guys, I want to thank you for your attention in this initial part of the summit. Now the time has come to build that analogy. How in tennis and cybersecurity, a precise response makes all the difference. And in order to do so, I'm going to first introduce Rob Nachbar, who's a tennis fan, a principal in Kismet Communication, who also happens to be our PR agency and a personal friend. And David Sylvester, who's the VP of Worldwide Sales at Lumu. And as you can see, a dog lover. David, Rob, good morning.
Thanks morning. Thanks, Ricardo. Hey, David.
Excellent.
Morning, Ricardo. Great to be here.
All right, guys. We're excited for what's coming. Guys, give me just 1 minute while we invite to the stage Victoria Azarenka as she deserves. Welcome, Victoria.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Victoria.
All right. Drop your panelist.
All right. I wish I had that kind of intro video for myself. Thanks, Ricardo, and thank you, Victoria Vika, for joining us. So there are quite a few interesting and somewhat surprising parallels between tennis and cybersecurity that we are excited to explore here today. So on the theme of preparation, they say that nothing is worth it comes easy. In terms of your own preparation, can you talk about how you prepare yourself in general before a match? Do you study up on every opponent? What else informs your strategy when you're going into a match?
Well, obviously, you know, it's all about paying attention to details. A lot of preparation comes, you know, way ahead before like the match actually happens. It always comes on the practice court. I do study my opponents, but also I try to focus on my game more, and how I just need to be aware of what my opponent does. But tennis is also about what you're going to create. You have to expect things that your opponent can bring, but it's all about you, all about precision, about details. The matches are long, so anything can happen. And you know, on tour, you also play a lot against players, you know, many different times. So sometimes you have to expect the unexpected and adjust. And there's, you know, also a lot of factors that come into play now with the technology and the video analysis. There's a lot more data where you can be able to prepare yourself, but sometimes it's also a little bit more overwhelming when you have too much information. So it's harder to keep focus on being simple.
And to that point, you know, tennis is much a mental game as a physical one. How does your mental perspective and preparation for each game against each opponent, how do you feel that influences the outcome of a match?
Oh, very much. As I said, you know, there's so many variables in tennis. Sometimes, you know, things like the weather can have a big impact. The crowd can have a big impact, and all of that is something where you have to be mentally strong, prepare yourself, sometimes block out the noise, block out maybe what your opponent does, and try to focus on yourself. So there's a lot of mental factor. You know, when there's a tough moment, it's about who's going to be braver, who's going to make the right decisions at the right time, where you have to be either more patient or you have to be more taking risks. So mental game is a huge attribute for tennis for sure, and it definitely plays out in the outcome.
Imagine. And as you prepare and strive to continuously improve, we must also assume that your opponent does so as well. How do you stay on top of new trends, tactics, training tools in order to build on this notion of continuous improvement?
Yes, definitely. The game of tennis has developed very much so, especially on a physical level, on the equipment level. You know, the balls, the rackets become faster, players become more stronger, a lot more physicality comes in play with power and speed. So it's always an evolution, which is like in every sport. And you know, having things like Hawkeye and other technology, you know, line calling. So there's a lot of things that come out more and more. So you have to be on top of those, and you always look for those, for that, you know, secret recipe where it can bring you even 1% where you can be on top of your opponent. So it's a constant evolution.
And David, you know, drawing the analogy back to cybersecurity, also a lot of preparation, strategy, and planning that goes into facing an unseen adversary. What's your take on that?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I think, you know, the large part of the last 2 decades, you know, we've been hyper aware of all the possible types of attack vectors that our adversaries are using to infiltrate our network and business. And if you're CISO, it's your job. You gotta be. But you know, to be real, you know, it's one of the most challenging aspects of our field in cybersecurity. And to be frank, it's exhausting. And if you want to draw on a parallel in tennis, imagine going toe-to-toe with Victoria in a never-ending tennis match, where the attackers are just hitting the ball right back to you every time and not going away. The odds are stacked against you. They just got to crack you one time and they're in. And it's this never-ending time-suck cat and mouse game. So, you know, building off what Wayne said earlier, complexity, cybersecurity solutions sprawl. You know, the average organization has 50 plus cybersecurity tools that they're using on average day to day. And you know, that's pretty insane if you really think about it and trying to defend yourself and the onslaught of alerts that come, and not to mention, you know, your security budget to the dismay of your CFO. But you know, what are we seeing as a more practical way, forward-thinking approach to, you know, prepare, study, and face our adversaries 2020 and beyond? It really boils down to that prioritization of intentionally looking for compromises, right? Putting more energy, time, and focus into that art and doing more with the network metadata. Ricardo explained how, you know, the bad guys have to use the network to carry out their cyber kill chain and ultimately hit their objectives, right? So if you can efficiently collect, correlate, and understand what your metadata is saying, what it's messaging out, you're gonna be at a much better strategic position to understand your adversaries. And, you know, the nice thing now is, you know, with the continuous compromise assessment technology, you know, this is realistic. You can do this now. So that's what we're seeing as, you know, really a more practical approach to understanding adversaries.
Awesome. And so moving on to the, you know, the title of this presentation, delivering a precise response, Vika. Tennis analysts have often commented on your ability to deliver a decisive response. How much of your success can you credit to the specific capability that you've developed over the years?
Well, the precision and the response is something is definitely you have to learn through the experience, and sometimes the bad experience help a little bit more, where you can you know, practice that skill. Okay, you can analyze it better and see what you can do better next time. So I feel like I'm not sure it's a talent. I think I would say it's more of a skill where you have to constantly practice and be aware of, and analyze after a match. You know, that's why also sometimes it's very helpful to be able to rewatch your matches and kind of have a different perspective of how you felt and what was actually happening in the moment. So definitely that is something that you constantly have to train and develop. And I think that's what also makes a big difference between, you know, average player and a great player, that decision making, the precision of, and being very aware of the moment.
Yeah, and you've been on the tour for quite a while now. How has that changed as you've gotten older and more mature?
Well, the experience always helps, but you know, every day, every match is gonna feel like it's a new match. So it's a constant adaptation. That's what the tennis is, and I'm sure you can draw the line with the cybersecurity, where you have to be prepared for whatever. All you can do is prepare as best as you can, and then adjust to what's coming to you using the tools that you've been practicing and the skill set that you've been practicing your life, and obviously learning new things and developing new skills. So as I said, I feel like it's an evolution, and you keep going, keep growing, keep learning. Even though you play so many years on the tour, you still have things that you can learn and you can develop.
What other strategies do you draw on to formulate the right response at the right time to ensure the response, and excuse the pun, is on point? For example, do you employ visualization techniques, that sort of thing?
Yes, definitely. Visualization is something that you want to set up your mind, and you practice different techniques like breathing and trying to stay present, try to find that focus in the zone where you can be precise, and like that laser focus on what you need to do in the moment, and try, as I said, try to block out many variables that are around you, where you have to just keep it very simple and be decisive.
Wow. And David, going back to you, why is a precise and timely response important in cybersecurity? What are some of the tactics that can be employed to ensure their response is also on point?
Yeah, time is definitely of the essence when it comes to cybersecurity. I mean, the more time you give the attackers, the more control they're going to have, and they're going to be able to dictate the situation. So you just think of a phishing website or ransomware spreading attack. You're not on top of this activity. It's going to wreak havoc exponentially. So a precise response for me starts with visibility. Right? You talked about some visuals there. visibility of all your infrastructure, your hybrid infrastructure of today, on-premise, cloud, remote workers now with the pandemic. You have to have that full view. And then you need a subset. You need a subset visibility of which devices are compromised, which ones are the problematic ones that you need to know about and do something about. And you know, just like Victoria said, make it very simple and easy to understand and see. So visibility, very first, you know, key component, what makes a precise response. The second point I'll make is, you know, compromised context is king here. And if you have bad intelligence, you know, you're not going to be able to defend off the attackers. You need to make split-second decisions as well. And you know, that's the beauty of Lumu, is just giving you, you know, that who, what, how, when attackers are coming after your network and putting it right in front of you with a quick glance. That's what we're building at Lumu. That's what we have. So visibility, compromised context. And then the last point I'll make is, you know, there needs to be action with this intelligence. You know, we still see far too often where, you know, compromised devices sit and reside on networks, and there's this, you know, this kind of lackluster response to doing something about devices communicating out with adversarial infrastructure. And it's important that, you know, CISOs do not allow this culture to occur. It's going to come back to haunt. And again, another tennis analogy here. If that's kind of what you're doing, think of Victoria 2 feet away from you, throwing the ball up and ready to just spike her full power serve right at you. That's what the cyber attackers are going to do to you. So, you know, going back to the good news, you can operationalize the concept of continuous compromise assessment. You do this, you know, it's going to complement everything you're doing with all those attack vectors, but you're going to prioritize looking for compromises. It's going to be game, set, match with the adversary.
It's a terrifying idea.
Right.
But I've seen her serve. It's fast. So, Vika, we have 2 special guests joining us here in the form of video, which we'll cue up here.
I do believe that as a tennis player, it's constant problem solving and trying for solutions and trying out things. On the surface, if you're just watching as a spectator, it might just look, oh, this guy's playing so good. But all the little decisions we have to take in every point, in every game, in every match, in every tournament, there are so many of them.
The biggest difference between any other sport and tennis is that you have nobody else to talk to. You have a coach, but you can't talk to them. You have to problem solve by yourself.
That was quite a match. That's quite a documentary too, if you haven't seen it. So, Vika, you know, going on that theme of decision making and having to constantly make decisions, you know, throughout a match like you're talking about, you know, what's your take on problem solving? Do you kind of see it the same way that Roger does when he's talking about just kind of staying in the moment?
Yes, definitely. And he mentioned 2 things: problem solving and finding solution. And I resonate better with the finding solution rather than problem solving. It's a little bit more of a, you know, a positive tone to it, and it creates a little bit more of like an action feeling for me, you know, finding a solution and how to do that. And I feel like he's very right when saying we have so many decisions to make, and sometimes, you know, there are decisions where you have to make, like, hit the ball and make a mistake and really go risk something, and it may not pay off in the moment, but it's gonna take you and into the strategy, you know, kind of few more steps ahead. So sometimes you do have to think like a chess player, not really think about just this point, think about maybe a next game. And it's to find that balance where you have to stay in the moment, but also think about a little bit of a strategy, you know, ahead. Like and as an example, I would say maybe somebody starts with a high intensity and then trying to keep your energy a little bit later for the match. And when guys, for example, I would say play 5 sets, you don't see that intensity in the beginning of the set. You see the most of the intensity later on in the set. So there's a lot of micromanaging, making small decisions, being strategic, but also a big balance of staying in the moment.
Do you want to play 5 sets?
No, I don't even want to watch 5 sets. I think it's way too long.
All right, so we're going to take you down memory lane into your first Grand Slam victory at the Australian Open.
In the end, the player from Belarus had the belief, the standout player of the tournament, winning her first Grand Slam title in straight sets. Azarenka, now the new #1 in the world.
That's gotta never get tired watching that, right?
I don't actually. I honestly, you probably can count on one hand how many times I've seen that,
Really?
unless somebody shows it to me like an occasion like this.
Well, I'd watch that like every night before I went to bed, but I never got much of anything. So talk us through what was going through your mind. How are you able to keep your focus at such an intense moment?
Well, you know, it was my first Grand Slam final, so obviously you are a lot more nervous because there's things, you know, that are just higher stakes. So you want to do good, and the factor of like, oh, I don't want to embarrass myself out there as well comes into play. But I felt like the match before that gave me a lot of confidence and clarity and belief that I felt that, you know what, going into the match, I know I'm gonna win this match. So I did have that self-belief, and my first 2 games were not really good, and I picked it up from there and kind of never looked back. But the first thing that I felt, obviously winning, I'm sure a lot of people say joy and stuff, for me was a relief, because it was like, okay, I've finally done something that I worked for, you know, so many years for, blood, sweat, and tears, and, you know, dreaming and being all the disappointments and the early mornings. So that was like a fast, you know, like a time-lapse flashback in my head that played out, and it was relief. And obviously after, it's joy, and it's there's a lot more emotions come to that, but the first one was that.
Well, is it different mindset going into a match as a underdog when you're first starting out versus being the favorite, being the #1?
It's definitely is a different feel because and it's something that you have to accept and learn, where somebody, when you're on top, everybody wants to beat you and they don't have pressure. But I always liked that pressure because I felt that it was a deserved pressure. Not everybody has an opportunity to have that pressure. So I embraced it, and it was more of, I mean, it was challenge for sure, but it was more fun for me to be able to go through those obstacles.
And how are you doing now with being sidelined with the pandemic?
It's a little bit weird, but last couple of years I had some of those breaks, so it's a little bit different for me. But just the ability that not being able to travel has been a little bit weird. It's been a little bit uncomfortable not being able to kind of have a free type of travel and motion. So
I guess your family's seeing a lot of you now.
Yeah, my family is in Belarus actually now, so unfortunately they cannot come because of all that. So that's been a little bit frustrating.
Well, right on. Well, thank you again for taking the time to join us today. David, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and we'll go back to you, Ricardo.
Thank you, Vika. It was great to listen to all your stories. It's always a pleasure to watch you playing tennis. And David, thank you very much. And now it is hard to introduce someone that truly doesn't need an introduction. It is my pleasure and an honor to introduce Bruce Schneier. Bruce is a best-selling author, is a cybersecurity guru, and to me has been an inspiration as I have been helping to solve some of the most complex problems in cybersecurity. Bruce, welcome to the Illumination Summit. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've been enjoying this so far. Hope you are all doing well in this pandemic, and I'm sorry I can't see people personally. I'm sure I can't see anybody personally. I want to talk a bit about resilience in systems. So I want to start by saying we're living in a world where everything is becoming a computer. Your smartphones are small portable computers, your refrigerator is a computer, your microwave oven is a computer, ATM machines are a computer, cars are a computer. Everything is a computer, which means that computer security becomes everything security. And everything we know about computer security is applicable to everything. And this is the Internet of Things. This is the computerization of everything. And we've been doing computer security for decades now. And up to now, we've kind of managed in this world. And I think as everything becomes a computer, we're going to see a sea change. And we have to re-understand what we're doing, or I think we're headed to catastrophe. And the things I look at are automation, autonomy, and physical agency. And that computers are affecting the world in a direct physical manner. Now, you think about computer security, there's the CIA triad, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The three properties we are supposed to provide in our computerized system. Most of the time when there's a computer security story in the news, it's a confidentiality story. Somebody stole data. Equifax, the Target hack, OPM, Facebook, Cambridge Analytica. But the threats come in many forms, right? There are availability attacks, DDoS, ransomware, integrity attacks, the Twitter attack from yesterday. Nothing was stolen, but the integrity of pretty much everybody's Twitter feed was compromised. Now, it's compromised kind of in a dumb way to try to steal Bitcoin. That could have been a very devastating attack if you move that to a political type attack near an election. But when you get to things, the integrity and availability attacks become much worse than confidentiality attacks. The effects are greater, and there's real risk to life and property. So while I'm concerned that if someone hacks my hospital and steals my private patient medical records, I'm much more concerned if they change my blood type. That is a data integrity attack. And I don't want someone hacking my car, turning on a Bluetooth microphone, eavesdropping on my conversations, but I really don't want them disabling the brakes. That is a data availability attack. So cars, medical devices, drones, weapon systems, thermostats, consumer goods, power plants, smart city systems. We are worried about DDoS attacks against critical systems, ransomware against your car. Right? And these become more dangerous as these systems become more critical. The Twitter attack, I think, would have been kind of benign in the early years of Twitter because Twitter wasn't such a major force. Right? Now it is. And the Twitter failure really exemplifies how these systems fail. It's a class break. All of Twitter was compromised. So we're worried about all of the cars, shutting down all of the power plants. I mean, these are real risks. At the same time, I think we're seeing the failing of some of our longtime security systems. Right? Patching works on computers and phones because we have a system of engineers at Microsoft and Apple that write patches, push them onto our systems, and we have this agile security. If that doesn't work for low-cost embedded systems, DVRs, home routers, built at a much lower profit margin. They don't have engineering teams associated with them. A lot of them are not patchable. They can be old, they can last for decades in a way that our computers and phones are not. They can be built by companies that go out of business in the ways our computers and phones are not. So patching is not going to work in the same way in the future. Second thing is talking about fails authentication. Right, so we believe that the Twitter hack was some authentication failure. And it's hard to know now whether it was someone was phished and their credentials were stolen, whether there was an insider that was paid. I saw that in a couple of news articles. We're going to learn more in the next few days. But authentication kind of just barely works. Right? Two-factor is great, not suitable for some situations. Backup systems are terrible. But what's going to change is the amount of authentication we're about to do. Now, when you authenticate these days, it's usually one of two things, right? And I'll demonstrate them both. Either I authenticate to a thing, I just logged in, or I authenticate to a remote service. I just checked my email. What we're going to see the rise of is thing-to-thing authentication. And that's 5G. 5G is not so you can watch Netflix faster. 5G is so things can talk to other things behind our back. And we don't know how to do authentication at scale without being involved. If you think of thing-to-thing authentication today, it's Bluetooth. You set it up manually. It's not going to scale. That's not going to work. The other thing that's failing is supply chain, which is insurmountably hard. Right now, the news in the United States is about Huawei and the 5G equipment. A couple of years ago, it was about Kaspersky, antivirus equipment. Basic question, can you trust hardware and software built in a country whom you don't trust? It's actually a much more complicated question than that, right? I mean, this is an Apple device. It's a U.S. company, but this isn't made in the U.S. Its chips aren't made in the U.S. Its programmers carry 100+ different passports, all of which affect the supply chain. We have to trust the distribution mechanism. We have to trust the shipping mechanism, the update mechanism. And more of these supply chain issues are affecting our security, and we don't have a good answer. And we don't have a good way to defend. So in this world, resilience is the most important property our systems need to have. And it's an interesting security property. It's really what I want to talk about. It's a combination of things, right? Survivability, adaptability, recoverability, mitigation. It's kind of an emergent property. It's not something you can buy directly. It's something you achieve. I think of it as the ability of a system or organization to maintain its core functionality in the face of a cyber attack. Now, Twitter had to shut down all verified accounts yesterday. That is not resilience. And resilience is how we're going to thrive in a world of pervasive threats. Right? It's the ability to operate in a dangerous world. I think we need more of this thinking in IT security. So we all know that security is a combination of prevention, detection, and response. And we need detection and response because protection isn't perfect. So way back in the 1990s, I used to say that security is a product, as a process, not a product. And by that, I meant a very strategic statement. And that you couldn't buy security and be done. It was an ongoing process. And in the 90s, that was a big deal to say. And tactically, security is really a product and a process. Now, actually, it's a combination of people, process, and technology. I used to say that a lot in the early 2000s. I think what's changing is the ratio between the three. So conventional wisdom is that people don't generally help with security and need to be removed from the system. So I want to read a quote from a usability professor, Lori Craner. She wrote this in 2008. Whenever possible, secure system designers should find ways of keeping humans out of the loop. What she's saying is automate. People are a problem. You need to automate your security. And we've been doing that pretty well. We have entirely automated prevention systems. Antivirus is completely automated. Update for most of us is entirely automated. We have some automated detection systems. We have some semi-automated detection systems. But here's the thing about response is you can't fully automate it. that as you move from protection to detection to response, your people to technology ratio goes up. And the reason is that automation requires certainty. And uncertainty requires flexibility, and that requires people. And you see that in response almost entirely. You see that in prevention, and in detection, kind of halfway. And so big data was supposed to give us certainty. The idea was if you have enough data, you can learn everything you need to know. The problem is it doesn't work that way. It kind of is a harmful mindset. So here are 5 conceptual differences between a world of certainty and a world of uncertainty. In a world of certainty, the focus is on data. The more data, the better. Right? The more sensors, the more data flows, the more information. In a world of uncertainty, you focus on understanding. You'll never have enough data. So what data do you need? How do you make use of it? Where are your holes? You become much more strategic about getting the data you want when you need it. In a world of certainty, you focus on planning. You have all the information, create the perfect plan. In a world of uncertainty, you focus on execution. You'll never have a good enough plan, so you need tools that allow flexibility and better execution. In a world of certainty, you focus on synchronization. In a world of uncertainty, you focus on initiative. In a world of certainty, centralization. World of uncertainty, decentralization. And lastly, in a world of certainty, you focus on control. In a world of uncertainty, you focus on command. In a world of certainty, we can get resilience through automation. In a world of uncertainty, we get resilience through orchestration. I want to come back to that word. Incident response is inherently uncertain, which makes it hard to automate. All attacks are different. All networks are different. All security environments are different. All organizations are different. Your regulatory environment is different. Political and economic considerations are often more important than the tech. This doesn't mean there's no room for technology or even for automation. So this is Laurie Krainer's follow-on sentence that I read earlier. However, there are some online tasks for which feasible or cost-effective alternatives to humans are not available. In these systems, designers should engineer their systems to support the humans in the loop and maximize their chances of performing their security critical functions successfully. And if you can't remove the people, make them successful. Give them the tools they need. So think of any emergency response system: police, medical, fire, military. A lot of technology, but the people are in charge. Right? We need technology that aids people and not the other way around. And the key word is, again, orchestration. It's the union of people, process, and technology. Incident response means to be dynamic and agile. It needs people in charge. Detection systems that are automatic are never perfect. You need systems that can go in and go in deeper and get more information. I mean, we know how long attackers are on networks before they're discovered. We're going to find out when the hackers hack Twitter. And my guess is it wasn't yesterday. A month before, 6 months before. Were this a political attack, it would be years before. Like, orchestration is computer automation where it works and human coordination where it's necessary. Right? It's network systems giving people understanding and capabilities for execution. So I want to close with a piece of military systems theory that's really relevant here. It's the notion of OODA loops. An OODA loop is a feedback cycle: observe, orient, decide, act. This was developed in the 1980s by an U.S. Air Force military strategist. His name is John Boyd. And he's looking at the process of collecting, evaluating, and acting on information. And his work, I think, is widely applicable in many different real-time adversarial situations. Airplane dogfights, strategic military planning, business competition, martial arts. I guarantee you it has a place in competitive tennis. It's an iterative process. People in these situations are constantly going through OODA loops in their heads. And speed is essential here. If you can do your loop faster than the other person, you can get inside his OODA loop, the phrase, you have an enormous advantage. And lots of people have applied this way of thinking to cybersecurity and incident response in particular. And lots of papers, books. I recommend Googling it. I think there's a lot interesting written here. So OODA loops are fundamentally based on an orchestration model. Let me go through the 4 steps. Observe, knowing what's going on your network in real time. And that ranges from real-time threat detection system from IDSs and log monitoring and log analysis and network and performance data, like real-time forensics data, what's happening, physical security information, kind of everything, right? Orient, what does it mean in context? In context of the organization, of the greater internet community. Is there a new piece of malware out there? Is the organization rolling out new software package or planning layoffs? And has the organization seen attacks in this IP address before? Has our network been opened up to a partner? Right? And this kind of orient requires information both from the network and the organization, but from outside as well, intelligence feed, news feeds. Third step is decide what to do in the moment. And in computer security, this is often really not thought about very much. But who has the power to decide? How do they decide? Do they get executive input, marketing input, legal input? How's the decision justified, approved, audited? And here hackers have an advantage because they are much more agile than defenders. And finally, act. How do we go into the network and make changes? How do we fix things? Right? Twitter had to act. What they did was they shut off every verified account. They had no better way of acting than shutting off access pretty much their entire users. So we need systems to do all these things. We need tools for all these things. Right? And we need systems that allow people to see everything at once. Because within an orchestration model, automation can be incredibly powerful. But it's the human-centric orchestration model that makes automation work. Right? Because that requires human understanding. You know, and we're not yet living in a world where artificial intelligence can take over for human intelligence. They can sort fast, they can search fast, they can pattern match quickly, they can do a lot of really smart things. But they can't make human level decisions in a dynamic, changing environment like a computer network. So I started this talk with the Internet of Things, but it's really just the latest in a long line of disruptive technologies. And it's exacerbating already existing trends. Attacks are getting more sophisticated. Their effects are getting more devastating. The regulatory environment is getting more complicated. Litigations are more common. And the geopolitics of cyber war are spilling over into organizational networks. So I think this is really the time to think about orchestration in terms of incident response. You know, the 1990s, when I gave that first quote, was the decade of prevention. The decade of antivirus, of firewalls. We were just getting those technologies working. And we still are building new preventive technologies today that are better than before. The 2000s was the decade of detection. When I started the company Counterpain that did real-time network detection. We had IDS systems, we had log monitoring. And today we are getting even better detection systems that are detecting more and more things faster and more accurately with fewer false positives. But this decade is the decade of response. Right? That response is coming into its own, really completing the circle. And the goal here is to bring people, process, and technology together. We need orchestration to defend against the threats. The threats are complicated, the threats are subtle, and their effects are affecting national security. So we need to think about these things in a holistic manner to solve against these threats. And with that, I'll end, and I will stay around for the question period.
right. Thank you very much, Bruce. Appreciate that. Great insight. I want to now come back on, guys, and introduce John Shaffer to the event. John, he's a forward-thinking cybersecurity practitioner for the global investment firm Greenhill & Co., which is based in New York City. And John, he has operations in 5 of the continents, almost 20, more than 20, I think, global cities. So, in a very high attacked vertical. So John's known for his ability to transform technology, functions, and increase performance and reliability, and eventually resulting in lower costs for Greenhill. He's been there 19 years. And John, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, before we get into Q&A, let's look at a short video here on COVID. Thank you there. All right, John. So again, thanks for joining. If you wouldn't mind, for all our participants on today's call, tell us a little bit about Greenhill, and more specific, what is your role at Greenhill?
So Greenhill's a financial firm headquartered out of New York. We've been around for longer than I've been there, but I've been there for about 19 years heading the technology. I'm the CIO for the firm. And over time, security became a much more important element. So it's become progressively more important to us. And I probably spend 50% of my time, dealing with security now, in my role as the CIO. And there's not a thing I can think of that we do that doesn't involve how security is affected. So I think it's a prominent role within the organization.
All right. Well, just seeing your operation and how you're in charge of security operations for infrastructure, 5 different continents, all these major cities. How do you prioritize your response in dealing with cyber attacks?
I mean, everybody's been talking a lot in this conversation. I think there was a good word in there, and it's really orchestration. I think the truth is we could have 500 people in an organization, and we're still not going to be able to go through and deal with all the alerts and all the information we get and how to sift through it. So it really is trying to get systems, developing systems that help, orchestrate what's going on. And we put a lot of time and effort into, putting systems in place, reevaluating systems that help us get through the massive amounts of data that we see.
All right. So sounds like you're making a conscientious effort to just keep things from spiraling out of control with complexity. Are you, with COVID and the threat landscape, I mean, how has it impacted Greenhill, and I guess what changes in the threat landscape are you seeing now?
Well, I would tell you that I don't think, for us, COVID has really affected the way we do things. But, I'll go back to even just what everybody was talking about earlier. There's a lot of preparation that goes into game time, and, COVID's game time. And if you were being reactive after COVID, you're probably in a little bit more trouble. So I think that, we've spent a lot of time preparing our organization, for these threats. I'm not sure that we prepared for 100% of our workforce to be working remote. It worked, and I'm glad it did. But nobody thought the entire world was going to be in flux at this point. So I think we've managed reasonably well, but it comes down to preparation, and we put years and years of effort into building a good security program, and I think that's what it takes. So I think I think we're still on guard, but I feel pretty good about where we are.
And just looking back over the last 19 years, how was there a spark that just kind of went off and said, Greenhill, let's become this progressive cybersecurity company, go all out with our operations, make it a focal point? How did you guys become such a progressive cybersecurity organization?
Fear, I guess. Fear of having your name in the paper, maybe. Certainly, we went public at one point in time, and we now fall under a number of regulatory environments that that it would be an embarrassment to some extent if we weren't prepared, and if our name showed up in the paper for the wrong reasons. I don't want to be Twitter. Not that they're going to be in any trouble, but that. Yeah. I'm sure there's some unhappy people there right now wondering what the heck went on. How did we become progressive? I think that we've taken a certain level of interest in security. It's funny that what sparked it was probably spam. There was a point in time where everybody was getting these emails and they didn't know why. And, what systems could we put in place that might help us alleviate that? And, it was pretty early in time, and we tried a couple things until we found what we wanted, and found out that there was ways, to really make our lives easier than a bunch of IT guys going through and writing rules every time somebody got some, wacky email that they didn't want. But, it was a combination of that. And it was a combination of, this whole thing, the whole security, issues becoming more prevalent, that we just started focusing more and more on how can we do things better and easier. There's 500 tools out there. There's maybe 2,000 companies out there selling tools, and how do you go through and figure out what's going to help make your life easier? I know your first guest was Palo Alto, and I was probably one of Palo Alto's first customers, and they were new and young, but they had a really good concept. And I was looking at 4 or 5 technologies at the time, and they had combined those technologies into something that looked really great. So we gave it a shot, and we became an early adopter. And so there's a little bit of risk involved there, but I think it played out pretty well for us. And I think from that point on, I don't know, maybe I got to know the right people, and we got introduced to technologies like yours that you get in early, and you see some value and hope that they survive.
Right. Oh, awesome. And one thing I think will be just helpful and interesting for everybody on the call. There's so much information out there. Like you said, over 2,000 vendors coming at you. How do you stay current, keep your eyes on the ball and really one step ahead of adversaries when there's just so much information out there? How are you staying, keeping yourself educated and ahead?
Well, first of all, I think you have to be passionate about it. If you're not passionate about, technology and keeping up on things in general, then it's probably the wrong space for you. But I think it's important that, you do a couple of things. One is a part of a couple of networking groups. We share certain types of information on how people are doing things, how people are addressing threats. And I think that's really valuable if you can get into an association with a group of your peers. People are definitely willing to share things without giving away trade secrets. I think that in the end, we're all in this together. I'm not wishing a competitor of ours to go down because we think we're going to gain their business. I think we're all trying to help each other out. So I think that's important. I think it's important to go to a couple of events that kind of give you some insight into what's out there. I went to RSA one year. That was probably too much an event for me, but you can sort of get an idea of what's out there. But I think that you have to find these things that make sense to you, that you'll get introduced to some concepts, to some technologies, and then you have to research them and try some out. Some of it's, for me, it's like taking a look and making an educated guess as to, what I think looks good. And, today, if you are a company that's developing a product and you can't make it relatively easy to use, you're probably not going to make it that far because there's other guys that are doing it. So if I can't spin you up in a couple of hours and see some, value, and that may be pretty simplistic, then I'm going to start losing interest. So I think, that you do need to do that. You need to align yourself with some people. It might even be your vendor. If you have a trusted vendor, they see things and start looking at things, and that's how you meet other people and look at, products that complement each other. And I think that's what a lot of the vendors are doing right now. Like Lumu has a specific thing, but you might work with a SIM vendor, or you might work with somebody else to be able to start to, bring in a couple different sources of intelligence to start making some educated decisions on what's going on in your environment.
Awesome. One more question for you. Just, in your mind, when you look at protection and prevention from cybersecurity attacks, how do you bring in detection? Like, is there a ratio in your mind of let's assume the adversaries are already inside and do more inside, or, you're throwing kind of the kitchen sink on the outside with protection?
Well, I think we have a lot of tools. I think we've tried to streamline our tools. At the beginning, somebody had mentioned the cyber kill chain at one point, and early on we had done some audits, and, we measured ourselves against the cyber kill chain and, what tools we had in each segment. And I think we, covered them, fairly well. But what I think what we've really moved to, and I'm going to cheat here because I screenshotted the screen from the beginning, but it really comes down to, how are you continually assessing your environment? And I think that's really what's important right now. If you do the example that I was thinking of is, everybody does an annual pen test, or at some point everybody did an annual pen test. But if you think that that's good enough for the next 364 days of the year, you have really exposed yourself, in my opinion. So we've moved to this concept where we continually assess our environment. We run internal assessments against our tools. We want to test the effectiveness of our tools to make sure that they're at least doing what they're advertised to be doing, and when they're not, then we either go back to our vendors and ask them why they're not doing it, or or maybe we have to look at something else. So I think it's really important that you start bringing in things that are always looking, and there are no major gaps, because it doesn't take more than a week to really get yourself in trouble at this point in time. And that's my opinion, but I think it's fairly accurate.
Yeah, no, and yeah, it's actually measuring what's going on behind all the tools, right? Holding stuff accountable. That's what Lumu's doing when Ricardo showed that feedback loop, and just closing the loop up, so where those air gaps are, what cybersecurity tools are doing what they're advertised, not just relying on what they're saying. Definitely sounds like a pragmatic approach.
Well, it used to be that, you would get a tool because it checked off a box that you were, that you covered yourself from an endpoint detection, or that you had some, okay, we have a firewall, and your auditors, think of like, okay, well, they check off the firewall box, not knowing how well the firewall is working, whether you're blocking the right things or not. So, that's great and all that, but that's not good enough. I don't think that's good enough for me, and it's probably not good enough for most people. It's like, now, let's really see, do I have it working right? And there's a lot of good tools out there, but if you're just buying the tool to check off a box and you haven't configured it correctly, or, what good does it do for you? So I think you need to continually assess your toolkit. You need to continually make sure that it's tuned properly, and that's all part of that continuous assessment of your environment.
Awesome. Yeah, some method to the madness out there, and stay on it. John, I want to thank you for coming on today. For all the participants, again, John, he's doing this at a global level. Again, 5 of the continents, 20 global cities, maintaining cybersecurity for really a highly sought after vertical and business. So, John, thank you so much for taking time to join us all today.
Thanks for having me.
You betcha. I now want to turn it over to Crystal Day. She is a customer engagement specialist, and she's going to show us how Lumu can help you respond with precision with Lumu. Crystal Day, please take it over.
All right. Hey guys, everyone, I'm Crystal Day, and I'm a customer engagement specialist here with Lumu, and I'm going to show you basically Lumu in action. All right. Okay. So all we're going to do first is we're going to go to lumu.io. Oops, .io. There we go. Okay. So on the top right-hand corner, you can see the Get Free Account. You're just going to click on that. And it literally just takes a few seconds to fill out all this information and to click register. That's all you need to do. For me, I have an account, so I'm just going to log in. All right. So here we have is the Lumu portal. So on the left-hand side, I'm going to go to settings. And I'm going to scroll down to accounts. So basically, you can invite as many users as you'd like. Just know that the users get a read-only view of the portal, while an admin can actually make changes to the portal. All right, below accounts, we have gateways. So I really want to focus on how important it is to set up your gateway. It's basically a public IP where you point your DNS to Lumu. So here on the bottom left-hand side, I'm just going to highlight that, and those are the numbers for the configuration. So if you have any questions about how to set up your gateway, all you have to do is click on this orange question mark on the bottom right-hand corner. You're going to click on documentation, deploy and integrate, network configuration, you're going to click twice. And here is all the documentation that you'll need to set up your gateway with Lumu. So you're going to keep an eye on this little orange question mark guy, because he's going to be super helpful throughout the portal. All right, I'm going to click on to overview. And for this section, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to filter by date. I want to get a more narrow view of my compromises. So I'm going to go to the last 90 days, and I'm going to hit apply. All right, so here on the top right-hand corner, it says that we have total contacts of 665. Basically, that's 665 compromises that are being detected within the last 90 days. All right, so here we have 2 types of overviews. Here you see is the activity overview, which is basically overall compromises, making it very threat-centric, okay? And scrolling down, here we have the distribution overview. And these are the endpoints that are being attacked, making it endpoint-centric, okay? So I'm going to go to the activity overview. And here on the right-hand side are the numbers correlated with the gray, which is the traffic that's being sent. And the numbers on the left, which is correlated with the compromises that we're detecting. So as you can see at the top, we've basically color-coded all of the compromises. So all you have to do is hover over a bar, and we give you a breakdown of all the compromises in relation to the traffic that's being sent for that specific timestamp. All right, so I'm just going to click on more details. So now in the activity overview, I can scroll down and I have the activity details. So as you can see, we have the domain, the type of attack, as well as the threat detail, a timestamp, and then the total amount of contacts. All right, so now I'm going to go back to the distribution overview. All right, so for the distribution overview, in this circle, I'm going to click, and here are all the labels that you've created for your organization that make sense. So that can be location, that can be departments, or specific codes that you create for your organization. So to create those labels, all I have to do is go back to settings, go into gateways, and I'm just going to click this little pencil button. And here you'll see the name, the IP address, and then for the label, you'll just choose one of the labels that you have already, or you can manually type in a new label. All right, so we're going to go back to distribution. Now, in the distribution overview, I'm going to scroll down, and here are the distribution details. These are the specific endpoints that are currently being attacked. All right, so I'm just going to click on one. All right, so this specific endpoint is telling me when it was attacked with the timestamps down here. And then on the left-hand side of the chart, it's telling me how often it's been attacked and then the different type of attacks that are happening. So for this timestamp, it's telling me, 6 phishing, 6 malware. And then here we have the timestamp as well as domain and the type of attack. All right, so we're going back into the activity overview. And let's say that I want to look at a very specific attack and learn more about it. I'm going to click on this command and control attack. Now we have the compromise radar. So on the radar, around in the circle, we have the time of day. All right, so the time of day is here. And in the center of the circle, we have the amount of hits, as well as the days of the week. So I'm going to click on compromised contacts. So here we have the compromise radar and we have a summary. So we have 128 contacts and 19 of the endpoints that are affected. So let's say I want to isolate a specific day. So all I have to do is close out all the other days and just leave that day open. So let's say I'm just looking at Wednesday. You're going to hover over the points for that specific time and day, and it'll tell you how many hits. So with this, you can decide and make decisions based on the patterns that you see. So are these contacts manual? Are they automatic contacts, right? So here we have the timestamp, the label, and the endpoint as well. All right, we're going to click onto contacts, and in contacts, we provide you the IOCs. And at the top here, we give you the option to be able to download those IOCs and have them externally. Down here on the right-hand side, we have related resources, and we provide you third-party articles and links. So these could be blogs, these could be white papers, different analysis to confirm this attack, and you can basically choose how far and how deep you want to do the research on this specific attack. For Lumu, we actually provide you with an incident response playbook. So for here, we suggest the malware one. All you have to do is click on Learn More. The little orange question mark opens up, and here's one of our playbooks. So in the playbook, we give you preparation, detection and analysis, containment, eradication, and recovery. And of course, we're going to give you some post-incident activity. So you and your teams can actually use these playbooks to form better strategies of how to handle these compromises. For more information, you can actually go to documentation, go to the incident response section, and here are the different playbooks that we have for you for each type of compromise. All right, so don't forget this little question mark. Remember, he's very, very helpful. All right, so I'm going to scroll back to the top. Now, basically what I want to do is I want to do a full investigation of how this specific command and control attack, how it began and how it started in my organization. So I'm going to go back to detail. And now I'm going to go into the attack distribution. And I'm gonna click on this circle. And again, these are the labels that you created for your organization, right? So I have my labels. Now, what I'm gonna look for is I'm gonna scroll through the time and dates and look at the first interaction with this specific attack. And it actually looks like it's someone in the WFH label. So WFH is basically work from home. So I'm gonna click on that label. And now I'm gonna look at the different users and the endpoints. So it looks like here the first user is actually A. Wilson, first point of contact. So I'm basically just gonna keep him in mind, and I'm gonna go back to the distribution overview. So in distribution, now you can actually go to endpoint and specifically search. So I'm gonna search A. Wilson and add them in there. All right, so we have A. Wilson in 2 labels. It looks like he's part of the WFH label as well as the finance label. All right, so I can probably assume that he works in the finance department and he's a working from home individual. All right, so we're gonna click on the WFH label. And oh, it actually looks like he not only interacted with the command and control attack, but before that, a phishing attack. So I'm gonna wanna find out more about this specific attack. Okay, so it looks like there was a phishing attack here that occurred at 8:36, and then the command control was active at 8:40. So there's about 4 minutes in between. And I can definitely say that there's a good chance that this phishing attack is correlated to this command and control attack. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna copy this. And now I'm gonna go back to the activity overview and go straight to domain. Now I'm just gonna paste that specific domain, and here it is. So it says last seen with A. Wilson, that was the user. Okay, I'm gonna go into compromised context. Okay, so now at the top of the page, we provide you with third-party vendors who are basically pros at what they do. So right here, we have Fish Tank, they're the phishing pros, so I'm gonna find out more from them. All right, so here in Fish Tank, it looks like this phishing attack is specifically a website that was actually impersonating DocuSign. So for those who don't know, DocuSign is an electronic signature platform. So I can assume that because the user basically works in the finance department, it's probably quite common for him to use this platform with his clients. And so there's a good chance he downloaded the malware that triggered the command and control attack that basically propagated throughout the organization. Wow, so that was pretty quickly how we found that. All right, so we're gonna go back here to the Lumu portal. And now I'm actually gonna scroll down a little bit further in the detail. And here we provide you with a spam box feature. So I can actually click on this. And now in the spam box, what I can see is I'm looking for that specific attack, the one we just looked for in DocuSign. And here it is. This is that attack. And here on the left-hand side are all the recipients. So as you can see, A. Wilson is one of them. But it looks like this specific attack was also sent to other people. This doesn't mean they necessarily triggered it or that they clicked on it, but you can see who was targeted for this specific attack in this campaign. So something that's really important, a lot of organizations are all about blocking spam. And that's great, it's really important. But at the same time, what we at Lumu want to do is we actually want to analyze that spam. We want to know where it's coming from, why, and how. So a very powerful feature that we provide here at Lumu is actually our spam box feature right here on the left-hand side. So we're going to check that out. So I'm going to go to spam box and I'm going to click on summary. All right, so here in the spam box activity is basically a chart of all of the spam that's coming through and being sent to all the people in my organization. On the right-hand side, we have the top recipients of those spam. So basically the person who's receiving the most amount of spam. And look, A. Wilson is actually at the top right as number 1, getting 43. Okay, scrolling further down, I have my campaign box. So at the top of the campaign box, I have a bit of a funnel. And here we have 7 active malicious campaigns that's being detected, and they're sending about 324 adversarial emails with about 45 IOCs that are affecting 78 recipients, okay? So now here I have the days of the week as well as the time of the day. So I can basically research and hover at when these emails are being sent, how often, and figure out if I'm seeing any specific patterns. All right, so here on the right-hand side, we have our trends section. So the trends are basically an overall summary of all the attacks that are being sent through email. So you can basically take action based on the trends that you see here. So for example, is your antivirus working appropriately? If you're seeing a fair amount of phishing, perhaps you want to create an awareness campaign, right? For your clients, for your end users, you know? It makes you think about your firewall. Are the rules set properly? Is it working appropriately? So these are basically the questions you can ask yourself as well as take action on. And here on the right-hand side, we have our top target recipients. So the big difference between this section and this section is the top spam recipients are receiving all types of spam. So this could also be text only. This could be, you know, advertisements, different types of written scam, while the targeted recipients here are the targeted recipients with specific attacks that are attached. So as you can see here, it's a different person at the top. So he's getting a lot of attachments of different types of attacks. All right, and here in the correlation box, we basically have the activity overview as well as the distribution overview, but in relation to all the emails and the attacks that we found in them. All right, so spam box, that's something that we're analyzing for you guys and finding out more information about. So I'm actually gonna go back to the overview. And if you remember, that user was actually part of 2 labels. So I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna do some research on A. Wilson again. Excuse me. All right, oops, here we go. Okay, so A. Wilson, we did the research, we found out he was part of the WFH label. Now I'm gonna check out the finance label because it looks like there was another attack that happened there. So, all right, it looks like there's a different attack here, and I'm just gonna look up to that. Okay, so it looks like it's a DGA. So basically a DGA is a domain generation algorithm, a technique that's sometimes used to basically avoid network detections. So I'm just gonna copy this again. All right, and I'm gonna go back to activity, go to the domain, and I'm just gonna paste that right on there. Okay. So here, it actually tells me that the malware family is specifically CryptoLocker, and this is something that's good to keep in mind. Now we're gonna go to the compromised context, and this time I'm gonna go to the content, excuse me, and I'm gonna look at the related resources. And it actually tells me, oh, in the first article, that it is a type of ransomware. Okay, so this is super, super important. You know, an organization needs to know if someone in their company clicked and activated a ransomware. Ransomware can take tons of time and tons of money for an organization. So something like this, finding out that, you know, like A. Wilson clicked on ransomware and maybe it leaked to the other parts of the organization is super, super important. So we figured that out fairly quickly. All right. So let's do a quick overview of everything that we just talked about. So with the power of Lumu, I was able to quickly investigate a command and control attack that originated from one user and how his actions, A. Wilson, triggered other types of attacks that spread throughout the organization. And it took just a few minutes and it was laid out there. It supported me with the phishing attack as well with our spam box feature. And in just a few seconds, I was able to figure things out and hunt things down. All right. So basically, if you're ready to leverage the power of continuous compromise assessment, just go to lumu.io now and you can register for your free account. That's all it takes. Thank you guys so much.
All right, thank you, Crystal Day. That was fascinating to see the power of Lumu and how we can help organizations to defend with precision. Now we're getting into the last part of the event. We're getting into the Q&A session. In order to do that, I'm gonna bring to the stage Maria Lovato, who's our Chief Marketing Officer, and Maria is gonna help us coordinate this session. Welcome,
Thank you very much, Ricardo. So we've received a lot of questions, so we're sorting through them. I can ask all the panelists to come online and turn on their cameras and unmute themselves so the audience can ask you a few questions. So I'm sorting through some of these, so bear with me for a quick second. The first one is basically for Bruce. With investment spiraling out of control, how are enterprises missing the mark?
No, I'm not convinced they're missing the mark. I think my guess is we're spending about as much as we should. We're just spending it badly. A lot of times we spend on technologies we don't understand that aren't doing the job. So I would look less at increasing budgets and more towards making sure they're effective. That's my guess. I'm not an expert in that. That's the kind of question that is more of an industry analyst would answer.
Okay, no worries. Perfect. I think that was a perfect answer. So John, this one's for you. John, agree with you on the implementation phase, and being frictionless is the key part. But let's say day 2, do you see immediate benefits? How do you size it?
Do I see immediate benefits like in any technology? I mean, I think that's probably a loaded question. I mean, it really depends on what you want to. It really depends on what you want to do and what you're trying to accomplish. I don't think everything's going to give you instant gratification. That being said, I've put technologies in place that I've seen immediate gratification. So maybe I'm wavering on the answer, but I don't think there's any right one.
Perfect. This is for Bruce from Victor. When you said it's been a decade, there's a decade of orchestration, can you identify a prioritization starting point?
I don't know. It's kind of interesting. And I want to amend what I said. I think it's the 90s was detection. I mean, that was the decade we all got firewalls. If people are around that long, that was the decade we convinced you to have antivirus on your computer. That was the big deal. 2000s was detection. That was the decade that IDS took off. Log monitoring, I mean, iForm counterpaint. That was going on in the 2000s. 2010s, I think incident response came into its own. And I had another company doing that, and a bunch of other companies worked on the response side, which was always kind of the bastard child of internet security. And here we are in the 2010s, I guess 2020s, I'm losing my decade. And I think now is when we're really starting to think about orchestration, that this notion of bringing it all together. And it's interesting. I mean, you have a product that allows you to monitor your other stuff, I mean, and sort of see the holes and see the gaps. And that kind of thing is so powerful now that we're trying to build this resilient sphere. I really think now is the time for stuff like this. I'm not sure we were sophisticated enough 10 years ago.
I agree with that. If I can add, I think it's time to close the loop. And I agree with Bruce that when he said that, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, we didn't have the building blocks that help us to assess the networks in real time the way Lumu does it.
Beautiful. So next question. What advice, this is for John, what advice would you give CISOs and CIOs to convince the board members to invest in cybersecurity tools? So what are those tips that you can offer our audience?
Well, a couple of years ago, they would have just wanted to see that it's all, it was all about the money. But now that boards are really being held accountable for security. So if they're directly responsible for it, they're definitely taking a more keen interest in supporting, cybersecurity ventures. That being said, they're still going to want to, they're going to want to understand what the cost is, right? A lot of it's based on risk. If it costs you $1 million to put something in, but is that worth it, right? Is that, are you spending more than $1 million to protect something? And maybe it's not, but I think that you would find less friction, or from a board wanting to approve something these days, but you know, they're trying to do a better job of understanding it. Boards are probably starting to put somebody more focused on cybersecurity on it versus maybe the accounting function, so that they can at least have somebody speak on behalf of it. It's really hard selling something to people that are purely focused on finance, right? They're looking at the bottom line, how much does it cost? But you know, your name shows up in the Wall Street Journal in a bad way. They don't want to see that. So I think, I mean, my answer is that it's easier, and that if your board is giving you a hard time, you know, you're probably getting yourself set up for something not so great to happen to you in the future.
Beautiful. This was for somebody from the Lumu team, maybe David or RV can help us. Does Lumu cover OT and IoT environments?
I can take that. I mean, it's a good question, because you know the way Lumu works is that we use network metadata, right? And the one thing that any asset have to produce is metadata. So an OT, an IoT, and definitely all the IT devices produce network metadata. We collect that and we assess that in real time in order to look for compromises. So the answer is yes.
Perfect. We're getting so many questions. I'm going to apologize in advance that we're not going to be able to get to all of them. Here's another tough question, and I think this one can go for Bruce or John. What is the root cause of breaches going unnoticed for a long time? And this was asked 2 times. So, and what is it, you know, why is there a breach detection gap, and why is that so big?
That's interesting. So we find there is I mean, it depends on the sophistication of the attacker, right? So you'd look at Equifax, the attacker was in the network for several months before they were discovered. The attack of North Korea against Sony, the attackers are also in the network for a couple of months before they were never detected. They were detected when they started erasing everything. You know, attacks can be fast, but sophisticated attacks are slow. You read about nation states and sophisticated attackers, they slowly and methodically move through networks, increase capabilities, and then eventually fire their payload. So the sooner you can detect an attack, the sooner you can disrupt it. And this is, we talk about it as a cybersecurity kill chain, that the faster you can disrupt the operations, the better you'll be. I mean, we're going to learn about this Twitter attack. And my guess is it was pretty quick, because it's kind of a dumb attack. I mean, if you're going to attack all of Twitter just to try to steal Bitcoin, real kind of lame. But if you think about a sophisticated attacker doing the same thing, they would plot that for weeks or months. And so, you know, you want to detect attacks as fast as you can. I mean, this is not new. This is, you know, sort of basic security.
Yeah. So Bruce, do you think that they were, I mean, some of these companies, I think, were probably a little lax on what they were doing to detect this type of stuff to begin with?
I'll guarantee you start reading about Equifax, they were terrible.
Terrible.
Sony was a disaster. I mean, they just not taking it seriously. Yahoo. I mean, we're going to learn about Twitter in the next several weeks. We're going to have a lot of stories. The latest story now is was there an insider who was bribed? Twitter is denying it, but there seems to be good evidence as a Motherboard article that appeared today. This is a breaking story, but we're going to find out, yes, that Twitter was sloppier than they should have been. And the problem is that companies don't take it seriously.
Right.
I think the last words from Bruce, you know, cut in my mind. Companies are not taking it seriously, and you know, connecting what John said in his session, you know, you had the false sense of security because you did that penetration test that report everything was good, but that was one snapshot, right? What happened the other 365 days of the year?
I don't even know if they're doing any of that.
And then, you know, to the point, I think, you know, enterprises have to systematically look for the adversary within the network. If there is a process built on that, we're gonna facilitate the way we identify those attacks.
All right. Let's ask a question for CD. CD, my question is, this is from Saeed. Can Lumu also alert in real time of an ongoing attack? For instance, a CNC attack or phishing or ransomware attack?
Yeah, so basically everything that we're detecting is all in real time. So we will alert you through our portal as well as through emails. So everything is all confirmed compromises. So we're not doing any false positives. We're giving you the specific attacks. And that's why we have those related resources that are showing you all the research of those attacks, as well as the third-party links that we gave you, like fish tanks. So these are real things that are happening in real time.
Beautiful. Here's another tough question, I guess, for Bruce or John. 3 years after WannaCry happened, what lessons did you learn? And how come it's still an active threat? This is from Adrian.
Yes, the answer is because me learning lessons doesn't do any good. It's with other people learning lessons.
That's a good one.
I don't think there was anything novel about WannaCry. I'm trying to think that made it, you know, new and something for the experts to learn lessons from. I don't think of anything, but I might be wrong. It's been some years. But you know, I mean, this is the issue. These happen again and again. I consider it a regulatory failure. As long as companies can externalize the costs, they're not going to take it seriously. You know, what is Twitter going to pay because of this? Probably nothing. Might be a momentary stock dip. Probably not. Right? Equifax, their fines were kind of minimal. Right? The lesson is, don't care about security because it doesn't really matter. So I really see this as a regulatory failure. That if we want companies to spend more money on security, you have to raise the cost of insecurity. And that is going to be through regulation.
Well, I think that's starting to happen now. Like in Europe, that's happening. I mean, the fines for GDPR are what, 2% of revenues or $4 million. And if, you know,
we're going to start to see them. There was a ruling right now against Ireland. Ireland has been the country that has, you know, companies have used as their European safe harbor because their regulatory agency basically doesn't want to prosecute under GDPR. And that was challenged by other countries. And now the ruling came, I think, yesterday. So yes, the EU is the regulatory superpower on the planet right now. And
you know, the funny thing about WannaCry is we continue to see networks infected with WannaCry. And we'll use complacents because, you know, the firewall or whatever is blocking those incidents. But the endpoints, the assets continue to be infected with WannaCry. We see that every day through Lumu.
That's mind-boggling.
And it's why nobody learns.
So I think we have so many questions. I'm going to apologize right now because we're not going to be able to get to all the questions. But let me ask this one question. What should be the priority for the CISOs and for CIOs, you know, for the rest of 2020 and beyond? And I think this one, maybe we can get the different takes from everybody.
I mean, the CIO here is John.
Well, I mean, I think you have to, you certainly have to evaluate the tools that you have in place. I mean, to me, that the endpoint is the major gap. You know, users are the biggest problem in the environment. So you have to do whatever you can to protect them against themselves because, you know, curiosity killed the cat. So, you know, I think 5 years ago, if you took a user and inconvenienced them, they'd be annoyed and they're like, I want you to turn this off. I'm willing to, you know, take my chances. I think, you know, you see it like two-factor authentication now. 5 years ago, people hated it. Now you can't get into your banking account without it. So they're like, all right, it's something I have to do. It's part of just like living daily life. So, you know, not allowing people to install their own software. Our users are used to that. You know, we lock things down. We're moving towards that zero trust mentality. You know, I use the advanced endpoint tools. You know, I don't use signature-based, you know, AV anymore because, you know, I mean, that would be sort of like on the kiddie realm. I mean, I'm more worried about nation state actors than I am anything else. And you know, they're not going to use those types of tools. They're going to be quiet about what they do. So if you're not using something like that, I'm not saying that everything's 100% perfect. You're setting yourself up for failure. So, you know, when you're asking your board whether you can spend a little more money than buying semantic AV and going to something like CrowdStrike or Carbon Black, yeah, they're more expensive, but they're going to stop the I mean, they would have stopped WannaCry. That shouldn't be something that you're seeing. I mean, that if you're seeing that, then
that's an issue.
I don't know what to tell you. I mean, you're in the wrong profession.
If I can steal, a quote from Bruce, in his book, Secrets and Lies, he said, it's hard to measure the security of a system if you don't measure the entire system. And that's what we're seeing in the cybersecurity industry. We usually put focus on critical assets and so on and so forth. But the truth and the fact is that we have to measure the entire system. And the entire system is producing network metadata. Lumu is that tool that helps you to collect all that network metadata to assess the security of your entire system. If you have one of the assets interacting with adversarial infrastructure, that should have not happened. There's an action to be taken on that point. Back to you, Maria.
Perfect. I wasn't sure if Bruce wanted to add something. We'll be answering every single question that we received via email. We do those, my team and I, and some of the rest of the technical team personally. So we'll get to those via email. I thank you for your engagement. I want to thank all of our panelists also. And now we're going to start on the awards. So for the awards, basically, we thought about how do we help you make a difference in your community. There's so many businesses right now that are struggling, that are going through a very tough time. So we thought that we will raffle the opportunity to either get a delivery of a dinner at your home and support a local restaurant, or support a local charity organization of your choice in your community, and just essentially give you a chance to make a difference in your town, in your city. I'll ask my marketing team to let's load the wheel, and we're gonna spin the wheel together. The first prize will be for $150. So let's do that, and let's see. Builders, congratulations to you. We can't wait to find out which organization you decide to support. $150 to your name right now. And let's spin it again for the $250 award. Burger, congratulations to all of you. And if you didn't win, do not worry. You'll have one more chance. Just fill out the survey, and you can get $200 for the same opportunity to help your organization and your town in some really meaningful way. So with that, I'll turn it back to RV for a quick comment and remarks. Thank you.
All right, just before we finish it here, I just want to just remember that there is a survey going on. You had the opportunity to win another $200 that we're going to raffle among those who fill out the survey. And lastly, I want to thank you, all the speakers, all the partners that made this massive event. We have more than 800 people connected throughout the session from multiple countries around the world. We will be raising the bar again in the next Illumination Summit. So stay tuned for that. And with that, thank you very much.